welcome to Civic Space TV here at Women at the Frontline program, where we bring to you women leaders here in Uganda and beyond, impacting society wherever they are. I'm delighted that you are with us and you continue to check us out. Thank you very much. And today I have a very distinguished African citizen, Jaja Fatoumata Toure, who is here to share her life in Pan-Africanism and women's rights activism. And we'll be walking through her journey of impact in that area in Uganda and beyond. And delighted to be hosting you, Jaja. You prefer that title of Jaja. Jaja means a senior citizen here in Uganda. You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I am so delighted and happy that you were able to make it. You know, the area we are going to discuss is a very unique but also little known about, especially in the circles that we are in. And I'm quite delighted that we shall be chatting through what it's all about, pegging your life journey in that discussion. So I'm so delighted to be hosting you on behalf of the women's movement, the Pan-African women's movement, which is beyond Uganda, actually.
Yes.
So thank you so much, ma'am. We'll start from that, from that point. I know a couple of times we've had run-ins here and there, particularly in women's conferences, women's work in Uganda. But there is more that would like to know about you, Jaja, and we'll start from there. Yeah, maybe a little bit, just a flashback of your background and life growing up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I am Pan-Africanist by birth. My family is Pan-African. It's partly East African, West African. Although I was born, as I told you, on the shores of Lake Victoria, I have to see the lake every day for spiritual reasons, or eat fish from the lake. So that's where life started some time back.
One would wonder, Fatoumata Toure, I would think it's a Senegalese, you know, background or something.
No, it's Guinean. Guinean. We are descended from Samori Toure.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where the name comes from. Yes.
Great to hear from you. Of course, we would just want to capture that little life or growing up, born in Uganda, on the shores of Kenya.
In Kenya, not in Uganda.
Born in Kenya, actually.
Yes. It was on the lake, but on the Kenyan side.
On the Kenyan side.
Yes.
Growing up on the continent, and of course, Uganda, beyond. I believe you've lived in several other countries in Uganda. Would like to know more. How was it? What are some of your best memories growing up in that life? Yeah.
Independence. I was a little child at the independence of Ghana. I remember the independence of Tanganyika, as it then was, Uganda, and also Kenya.
Wow.
So we grew up in an era where there was a lot of optimism. The music, there were all sorts of magazines from all over Africa, drum magazine, you know. So there was that Pan-African aura you are growing up with. You know, you grew up as
exciting environment.
Yes, as a Pan-Africanist. You always needed to know what was happening in other African countries and identifying with the struggles. Then, of course, much later, as a youth activist, the time of the Vietnam War, the Cold War, the anti-colonial struggle. So we followed all those closely. So that's how we grew up as Pan-Africanists, because we are also part of those solidarity, solidarity
so you
movements.
call yourself born a Pan-Africanist.
Yes.
Great.
And bred.
And bred.
In those values.
And you live by them.
Yes.
I believe you'll die by them. Or in it.
Hopefully.
When the time comes.
Yes.
Okay. So what are some of the memories you have in that season? Of course, you've already started on that, but I'm itching to just go a little deeper into those experiences, because I know why I'm asking this question. We want to fit in. We read a lot of these things in the books, but having an archive still living like yourself brings the story to life, and it's very exciting for the listener.
Not everybody, not every African is a Pan-Africanist.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have since learned,
Mm.
just like not every woman is a feminist.
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. Mm.
So I was not originally a feminist as such,
Okay.
but it was through professional struggles
Mm.
when I saw how Black and African women are treated in especially in the profession I trained in, that I started wanting to learn more about the nature of society and eventually the history of these societies and the role of African women in those societies.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Right. And of course, I believe that your life has a landmark of growing up, studying this particular, profession, practicing it, and then becoming the who you are at that maturity point. That's the life we want to capture and walk through the landmarks and see how or what it took to grow this Fatoumata Toure that we have right now.
Okay,
Yeah.
originally I was a law student.
Right.
I was a law student because I was inspired by certain women jurists. Says the late Justice Annie Jage of Ghana, who was the first woman judge in the Commonwealth.
Wow.
There was Angie Brooks of Liberia, who was the second woman and the third African to chair the United Nations General Assembly.
Wow. Wow.
There was Madame Jeanne Martin Cissé, who worked with my father, but who was the first woman in the history of the UN to chair the Security Council.
All of them lawyers.
All of them. No, Madame Cissé was a politician. It is Angie Brooks of Liberia and Annie Jage who were lawyers. But I was inspired
by them.
By these women. So originally I wanted to become a lawyer, then later defected.
You could have done well in law as
defected
well,
into languages and trained as an interpreter.
Oh.
In Havana, Cuba.
I didn't know you were an interpreter.
That's what I am professionally.
Wow.
Yes.
So how many languages do you speak?
My 3 professional languages are English, French, and Swahili. English, French, Spanish, but I also add Swahili.
Now. Yeah.
In our parlance, we call it passive. I can work from Kiswahili, but I can't dare work into. Not when the Tanzanians are watching. Yes. So it is those 4 languages.
That's very important in the current Africa that we have, because, and the world, of course, as it is. But I think then when you were growing up, languages was not taken a very serious area, but now the demand is even higher.
But even today, languages and even interpretation is not taken seriously. Yes, especially where an African is involved. They don't,
I feel like our children,
they don't think you can do it, or B, they don't think you should be doing it. So we've always had to try and force through doors, you know. As I was telling you earlier, they'll find you sitting in the booth where it's written Spanish and they come and yank you out, or they see you. So it's like you don't belong. So I've been an interpreter for over 40 years now.
40 years
but I'm still being asked, do you speak English?
Unbelievable.
Do you speak French? And is that Cuban Spanish of yours recognized? You know, that kind of, the attitudes.
Oh, yes.
Really. So that's one of the main barriers, especially with bureaucrats and other senior persons, when they're of a certain mindset. You know, there's all that Cold War history behind it. So it's really been very difficult to work as an interpreter in Africa, I can assure you.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Wow.
And there have been 1 or 2 events that really marked me. You know, I remember I was working in Kigali. They had told me to get my ticket. Now, when I took my ticket to this lady, she exploded. She was like, what is this Entebbe? If you live in Kampala, what is Entebbe? And what is this Rwanda? So I said, but you can't be working for a Pan-African organization and you don't know that the capital for the airport for Kampala is Entebbe, and you've never heard of Rwanda, and we are in Kigali. So I said, there's something I'm not getting. Africans don't know Africa, or they don't want to know, or they don't know that they don't know.
Wow.
She's a senior officer from the African Union, and she threw me out.
Just like that?
Yes, she's never heard of the word Entebbe. So I said, well, I think there's something lacking. So that is why we later came up with this training when I was working, I told you, with this women's NGO, and you'd be surprised. You give somebody, a graduate, a university graduate, a map of Africa, and you tell them, can you show me, okay, Nigeria, Ghana,
Where?
Show me Cameroon.
Or Gambia.
They're navigating in the Indian Ocean. So I said, there's something we don't know enough about ourselves.
As Africans.
Hence those unfortunate incidents. So when I'm not interpreting or translating, I used to dedicate myself to my time to, to teaching. Because you can't be a Pan-Africanist if you don't know Africa.
If you don't know Africa,
yes.
Yeah.
And especially if you don't want to know. Because part of the problem we have, there's a lot of Western soft power.
Wow. What is that about?
So you ask a class, how many countries in Africa they are looking at themselves? How many countries in the states, in the United States, some even put up 2 hands.
So much.
So I say, there is something we are not doing right. Why do the young people all look to the United States and not to the rest of Africa?
There must be a problem,
yes.
and I would like you to address that in this discussion today, because today we are dedicating this conversation to Pan-Africanism and women's activism or Pan-African feminism. I would like just to pick it up from there in terms of your choice to do this work. Why have you decided or then decide to be at the front line of this Pan-Africanism activism across the continent?
Because we don't know ourselves. We don't know ourselves, we don't know our achievements.
And we don't want to know.
This is it. There are people who just switch off. Once you say Pan-Africanism, it's as if you said something, taboo subject. So it's about how you also package the message.
The message.
But I can assure you it is not easy. There's a lot of resistance. A lot of resistance.
Now, I'd like you to speak a little bit of what it is all about, Pan-Africanism as an ideology. And I think you have tried to educate me as well in terms of us not knowing our history, not wanting to know, and what is the third?
Not knowing we don't know.
Not knowing we don't know. I'd like you to speak a little more about that, also enriching us about what this whole ideology is, because I agree with you, really. There is a lack of knowledge.
I think it has to do with African history, especially starting from the era of slavery, colonialism, and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, the other day, I was struggling for us to celebrate the 500th anniversary of the first slave revolt in the Americas in 1521 in what is now the Dominican Republic.
Right now.
Senegalese slaves rose up against Diego Colon, who was the brother to Christopher Columbus. His brother went and started a plantation with the African slaves, and they revolted. Now, people usually talk about 1610 in the United States, but almost 100 years earlier, African slaves had revolted because they'd been there for coming to 140 years.
Wow.
Now, I got to know that story through a Cuban historian who was on the UNESCO committee on the history of Africa. They came up with 9 volumes of African history. Now, just to show you how sometimes the contradictions, the hardcover
is 9 volume.
Yes, hardcover is very expensive. But then they came out with paperbacks. So I went to the university, Makerere University, to the library there, the booksellers. I was told they're selling the books there. So let me get a few volumes, because some people in my classes were like, we are not aware that there is this. So I said, let me go and get a few volumes, 2 or 3 volumes. I asked the guy at the counter, do you have copies of the UNESCO history of Africa? The guy looked at me like I'd said something taboo.
So strange or something.
He said, Madam, are you from this country? What do you mean? Do Africans have a history? You look at this one. Then going off in Luganda. Now, as he's busy laughing at me, I saw behind him a whole row of the UNESCO history of Africa. He doesn't even know what he's selling.
Wow.
So you see, those are the issues we have. So you shouldn't be surprised that a young person that cannot locate Cameroon on the map, or Djibouti, or the town of Fez.
Wow.
So it's what we are teaching them. What is in the curriculum.
What is in the
This is
curriculum?
it.
Yes.
So sometimes when you talk about Pan-Africanism, they think you are talking rubbish. Or they think it is reverse racism, that you are against the Bazungu. Says, no, it's not that we are against anybody. We want to learn about ourselves. So I struggled with that Diego Columbus uprising and gave up. You know, because every month we wanted to be celebrating something that happened in Africa or in the diaspora. You know, the Dominican Republic, that is part of our diaspora. But there is no interest.
There is no interest.
There is no interest, and then there's plain hostility. I mean, some people at one time were dealing with a red paper and writing all sorts of crazy things about Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanists and that crazy Jaja. You know?
Wow.
Yes, the red paper. For years, they were on my case.
Wow.
And then you discover that it's your own so-called friends who enlisted their support. So you see, instead of discussing the issue, you are now jumping onto somebody.
A person.
Yeah.
Okay, so about this history here, I don't know what your perspective is all about. Of course, you're very right in terms of the knowledge base, and we blame it on our curriculum. But even at the level of leaders, with the challenges of being able to read, it can be amazing for you to find that there are leaders, of course, who do not know the history of their countries, let alone the African continent that you're talking about. I don't know what your thoughts are. How can we improve this situation then? Yeah.
I think when you notice there's a problem, you do something about it.
Yes.
Whether you succeed or not, but at least you tried.
So just go back to that question, how we can be able to address this concern, because as you raise it, it impacts even leaders. There are leaders in our various countries on the continent that do not know about this history, and of course, even of their own country. So how then can we address this challenge? Yeah.
I think we need to revive the old networks. When we were growing up, I mean, I remember there was always one delegation or the other. There was always something happening. And, you know, the press was not so much into the problems,
That the foundation.
You know, but you got to know a bit more about what's happening in the other African countries. For example, now I would like it if Civic Space went digital and had correspondence. So instead of watching CNN, Al Jazeera, we'll be watching Civic Space to find out what is happening in Lesotho, in Sudan, the floods in eastern Nigeria, and so on, through our own media.
Locally.
That is the other problem we have. The media we are relying on is alien.
So they inform people on what they desire.
And they have their own interests. So why don't we band together and
have our own media?
This is it.
Which can shape our own story. And
there's
tell
now
our
the
own
internet.
Story.
There's now, you know, we have to tell our own story. That's part of the problem.
I must say we envy that generation of yours that grew up at that time, the anti-apartheid, anti-colonialism. There was a spirit to that activism. There's a certain gap that missed out in terms of
There was solidarity. There was solidarity, which we don't have today. For example, if you look at the figure of Patrice Lumumba, how they struggled and how Africans rallied
around him
to the cause of Congo. I'm old enough to remember how all hell broke loose at the UN when the news came that Lumumba had been murdered. And in fact, they got to know 1 month after. People like African-American writers were demonstrating. So you can see the transatlantic link. But now we are here in Kampala, something is happening in Jinja. We are not aware. With all our internet and whatnot. So partly because the solidarity is not there. We cut our political teeth on solidarity. So now when it's no longer
movement
there,
building.
You kind of feel like, and those days there were no donors to give seminars on how to build a movement. You just did it. It was a different method. So we are from another generation. So sometimes you don't quite fit.
And I must say also, if you hear the president of Uganda speaking about Pan-Africanism right now, it feels as if he's a lone voice. here in Uganda. Even on the continent, we don't quite hear that voice.
No,
and
but
now
Uganda,
Malema in South Africa, you know, and a couple of you still standing and speaking.
No, but remember the president is himself a product of Pan-Africanism.
Right.
He's a graduate of Dar es Salaam University
Right.
when it was at its best. And he also trained in Mozambique.
Yes.
With the Frelimo fighters. So there was always that Pan-African solidarity. So that generation grew up like that. Then, of course, things changed. But it's from that generation that that was forged in African solidarity. So it's in our blood, really.
It's in your blood.
Yes.
But I would like to pick, now that I have you, to pick those, you know, important things, lessons, what should be done, because we feel there is a lot of disconnect. And yet this ideology you're talking about is the future of Africa, of East Africa, to be able to take us to, you know, counter or engage better with the world. Some recommendations from you, senior citizen, on that discussion.
I think Africans should, first of all, learn about themselves. Like here in Uganda, especially African women in Uganda who made a landmark achievements. You have Professor Josephine Namboze. You have Madame Jael, who was the first woman mayor in Uganda.
Of Uganda.
You have all sorts of women here in Uganda. Some of them have written books. Madame Joyce Mpanga just wrote a book. So I think we should learn about our history from our own sources.
From our own sources.
Many books have been written. Right now, I have a list of almost 300 books in my database about African women by African women.
I would like you to start generally first before you focus on women, because it's a general problem. It's beyond women. I think beyond us women leaders, even the other leaders from the general sector, really.
No, I will lay emphasis on women because of what I myself went through.
Right.
The number of times we've been bumped off a plane. I remember one time we were working for one of these Emirates, not UAE. And the government of that country put us on first class on their airline. A policewoman came to yank me out of the first class. Like, what are you doing there?
What are you doing here?
Then the airline came on and said, leave our passenger alone. Yes, but what is she doing? It's like, you should not be there.
Wow.
Or the number of times I told you are sitting in the Spanish booth and they send a policeman, hey, remove that woman from the Harare.
So you're talking of double jeopardy for women. Double racism also happens.
You see, you have to affirm yourself. I'm also here. I'm also a citizen of this continent. I also have a right to be here.
First as an African and then as a woman.
But as a citizen, I have a right to be.
Okay.
So that is also not easy because we also have our traitors. They said, why are you always going to sit in that Spanish? But if they recruited me for Spanish, in those days we used to work for the Nana Line movement. Serious problems, You get bumped off the airline, you come a day late, they don't do the booking for you, they expect you to be staying in some other, Also, they don't treat you the same as they treat everybody else.
I would like you, Jaja, to talk a little more about the importance of Pan-Africanism to this generation and why we still need to have this discussion, because we don't want it to die out with you, the champions of that generation. Yeah.
Pan-Africanism cannot die. Firstly, when you talk about the Pan-African movement, the very first Pan-African movement was when humanity started here in Africa and worked to populate the rest of the world.
Right.
That was the first Pan-African movement for us. Secondly, the modern Pan-African movement as we know it today. Women played an important role, but it's not always highlighted.
It's never highlighted.
See, the first main meeting was in 1900.
1900?
In London, the Pan-African Conference. They usually mention the figure of Henry Sylvester Williams. But Henry Sylvester Williams was aided and in fact assisted greatly by a woman from South Africa known as Alice Kinloch.
Who even knows her?
They'll always talk about Henry Sylvester Williams, but never about Alice Kinloch.
Right.
So we have to, I was telling you, women are like potatoes. We have to excavate them now. Before you can eat it, you have to excavate it. Even when you had the African National Congress, founded in 1912, There was a woman at that Congress who was later the founder of the Black Women's League,
Movement.
which later became what is now known as the African ANC Women's League.
Ah.
But what they also don't know is that that woman was one of the first, Charlotte Masheke, to get a degree in the United States. Now, when they were studying in the United States, Dr. Du Bois, who is usually credited with the first 5 congresses, heard that there were African women at this, the 3 people from South Africa, the lady and two gentlemen. So he went to greet them, and then when he went to meet the South African, was sharing a room with a certain Nina, who later became Dr. Du Bois's wife, and is the mother of his living descendants.
Right now.
So you see, there's always that transatlantic link.
Yes.
There's that but also the role of women. That is not being highlighted. I'm glad
in
now
liberating Africa.
Yes, I'm glad that now there's work being done on Alice Kinloch, who, by the way, died in Kenya.
Wow.
In the 1930s.
Wow.
We are still trying to find out where exactly, but we believe it's in Kiambu, just outside Nairobi, because there's a South African community there. I know people from that community. You know, we always look for African communities in other African countries. So South Africans in Kiambu, they were granted citizenship by Mzee Kenyatta at independence.
Right.
You know?
Wow. Wow.
So we have to also celebrate women who played a role. And not always that, it's not just we are against the guys as such, but we have to.
As we document that history, the women's history is missing in their contribution.
Yes, so well. We call it her story.
Her story.
I remember once a colleague going berserk in Dakar. We were working for a women's meeting and they were saying something about her story, and he was like, but these women can't spell. I said, my dear friend, that is not a word, it is a concept. Her story. It's now writing history from the women's perspective. It's not about eliminating anybody else, but now to show that there were other actors in this story.
And this story is missing those actors.
But as I told you, when people are set in their ways, it is not easy to come up with anything innovative. Hence the struggles.
Because you're fighting against a system which has been around for many years.
Yes, established, and it's like what you call here in Uganda, chipinga. They are now busy fighting everybody. These are contradictory. No. The story must be told with all the actors who are there.
And now I would like actually to pick it from there, because then you've been, putting your impact here and there. Of course, in that story, there is Fatoumata's story herself. I could also want to just know a few of your, things that you celebrate yourself for in terms of contribution in this discussion of Pan-Africanism, women's feminism within the Pan-Africanist wider movement. Just to, your footsteps a little bit, 1 or 2.
It's not easy because there have been many challenges.
I know.
And constraints. But one wants to, raise your head above all the hullabaloo. But I can assure you, it has not been easy.
It hasn't been easy.
Like there have been issues in the women's movement, in the Pan-African movement itself. I told you there are those incidents with the red paper and so on. But one does not give up the struggle, although sometimes you want to hang up your gloves.
Not yet, not quite.
You want to hang up your gloves because you just want to rest a bit.
A little bit.
Yes. I just want to rest a bit.
But you have been teaching about these things. Yes. I know that you have a lot of impact, and I hope you're writing your book in terms of promoting the ideology. Like Mzee Museveni continuously does it in his speeches. Everywhere you hear him talking. And I think those kind of things, you don't want to miss that impact and capture it even on this program.
Yes. I think the area where we have not done very well is advocacy.
Advocacy for that.
For Pan-Africanism, because many people think it's about fighting white people. So why are you fighting white people? Apartheid ended. Said, I'm not sure apartheid ended.
It's still existing.
It's still existing and in other forms. And there's gender apartheid is still there. But I think we have to do a lot of advocacy through information dissemination. We need to have maybe a few more seminars.
Yeah.
Then there's also the language issue. There was a time in the Great Lakes region we had language issues about the French language, for example. So I kept telling people, but it does not mean that all French speakers are génocidaires. If Thomas Sankara came back to life, what language would he be speaking?
French.
If Frantz Fanon came back to life, what language would he be speaking?
French.
My own father, Sékou Touré, if he came back, what language would he be speaking? So I think we have to rise above some of these things and really work hard on advocacy to make Africans know about themselves by themselves.
By themselves.
Yes.
By themselves.
Many other people have cut in and with their own versions and whatnot. We also have to realize that it is not one movement. There are several people. So the idea is to just link up and make sure the work gets done.
Okay, so in terms of the work getting done, are there some organizations, some clubs, some things that are happening here in Uganda that are trying to do that work just for knowledge purposes?
Not just Uganda. There are, especially in diaspora, there are many organizations.
Of course,
many organizations in the diaspora.
But here in your continent,
even in Africa. But the problem has always been that somebody wants to be the only one and the rest are illegal. I think we have to do away with that and just work with everybody's different.
Making different contributions.
And but we are all aiming at one rallying point. So instead of dismissing others because you don't agree with them, just work with them the way they are. And if you can't, too bad. So those are the kinds of, and then of course there's been the issue of money. Cannot do many of these things if you don't have money. And sometimes the donor source controls your program. So challenges are there.
When you say disagreement in ideas, do you want to suggest that there are different ideologies within the Pan-Africanist, ideology itself?
No, we've had issues of people saying that they are the authentic Pan-African movement and the rest of you are fake.
Wow.
So there's been those, but that has always been there. When Dr. Du Bois was doing organizing, there was Marcus Garvey who had his own. But as far as we are concerned, both of them are important, Marcus Garvey and Dr. Du Bois.
Okay.
It's not either or. We need both of them because Marcus Garvey was emphasizing economic independence, which is still an issue today.
Wow.
And Dr. Du Bois was emphasizing Africans knowing about one another. He wrote a lot and organized meetings and that kind of thing.
So what's your dream of the Africa that you want to see soon in terms of that discussion?
I want to see Africans being kinder to themselves.
To one another. To themselves first.
As an interpreter, we traveled a lot. There's times you go to an African country and you're required to line up in a column called others.
Huh?
Yeah.
Why?
I know.
That still happens?
Because all those immigration things have not been worked out.
Huh?
Yes. Why can't Africa, just like in Europe, why can't you move freely from one country to? So I think part of the problem is the kind of legislators. You can come up with an idea, but so long as there's no enabling legislation, it will remain a dead letter.
Being kinder to one another means the brotherhood, the spirit of sisterhood.
But it also has to be there that when somebody from Sao Tome reaches Entebbe, they can just move in. Instead of being told, now, where is this country? What are you, kind of thing. But then an American just walks
in with the priority lane, probably.
So there, I think really our parliamentarians, not just in Uganda, but all over, really have to work on the legislative front and make sure that all these things are realized.
And you mean the Pan-African government, Pan-African systems, and
this is it.
The unions.
For so long as there's no legal backing this,
it
will remain the dead letter, as we say.
Okay.
So I think the parliamentarians should work slightly harder and come up with the right legislation.
Okay. All right.
For free movement of goods and persons.
So that is not in contradiction with the discussion of the federations now happening and growing up.
Even there, you'll still need the parliamentarians. So I think our parliamentarians need to pull up their socks a bit because at independence, we had a different brand of parliamentarians. They were very active. But now, really, I think there should be more action on that front.
So what could organize us? What could be that, rallying point, pause for these leaders, Pan-African leaders, you know, to come together?
No, you have adopted, you've signed the treaties abroad, but then, you know,
Already.
you have to domesticate those treaties for them to come into force in your
Yes.
country. So that is where the problem lies.
Ah.
Yeah, you've seen the problems at the borders and whatnot. For so long as there is no legal backing, trucks will be piling up at the border, Africans deported from African countries and that kind of thing.
But
Yes.
of course, recently you had in our recent independence celebrations, Uganda here, the Kenyan president and others are frantically talking about breaking the borders.
Of course,
Do you
because
see
you
that
cannot
happening
trade. You cannot
soon?
trade when those borders are there. But I was telling something. The greatest borders we have are the ones
in the mine.
in the mine. People still say, "What are the?" It's always this. What are you doing here? Kind of thing. You know, it is easier for an African. Like somebody was joking that it's easier for a Kenyan to be president of the United States
than in Kenya, in Uganda, in East Africa itself.
Yes.
You see?
I mean, Niger once had a president who was originally Mauritanian.
Wow.
Yes. But it can't happen in other countries. So really, I think it's there that the parliamentarians are, you know,
have the work to do.
Yeah.
And recently somebody made a comment and said the president of East Africa seemed to be willing to federate, to come together. But are the people ready? Are we ready
The
as
people
the
are
East
ready a
Africans?
long time ago.
Is that so?
It is the legal system holding us back. So long as you don't adopt appropriate legislation, we are not going anywhere. That's why nothing is moving. Since '63.
Wow.
The founding of the OAU. It's very good to have it on paper, but you have to operationalize.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what's holding us back. There's been legislation for people to come from the diaspora and settle in places like Ghana, Senegal, and so on.
Settle back home.
Yes. But that's a drop in the ocean. If we had this vibrant transatlantic movement, where we are now free people and not going there in chains. So the chains are not just with slaves on the boat, but it's our legislation.
As well?
Yes. So I think that is where we really have to get a move on.
To get a move on. But that would be possible because it's now parliaments just speaking with each other and working together with the leadership of
One would have thought the Pan-African Parliament would have been at the forefront of that, but you saw they also ran into issues.
So what would
we have to make our institutions work for us.
That's very important as well. All right. So Jaja, quickly on women's Pan-African feminism, I know you've talked a little bit about it, but probably just to point out for us some of the pitfalls in that journey that you have walked. What are the gaps as you've done in the other area?
People don't want to know. That's the main. They don't want to know. So you don't know if it's out of ignorance or malice, but we've come up against that wall of resistance. So that really now is the real mental barrier.
The mental barrier is the biggest problem.
Because we don't know about one another, we don't want to know, and we don't know.
There is a feminist forum right now, the African Feminist Forum. It happens annually. And the emphasis is around knowing each other, Fatoumata and others across,
I know the forum, I've even worked for them. With these challenges.
Yes. So we need to know more about each other and our works and our contributions as feminists, as women.
But also there should be greater dissemination. Because you see, when they meet in those meetings, they are talking in English, French, Portuguese, what have you. I think we'd be better off if we had some work done in Luganda, Swahili, Zulu. So so everybody can follow what is going on. You know, the colonials were very clever. Everything was done in English, but also in the native languages.
Of the
colonial, they knew what they, so everybody knew what. But now, we can't do this, because of national interest. As a linguist, I believe we should be working more in our national languages, so that we can reach the women, we can reach the young people, we can reach those who feel they want to contribute, but then they are told, you didn't go to school, or that kind of thing.
Wow.
So there's that language aspect of it too. Dissemination, as I told you, we need to operationalize all these things, and also do advocacy. But you have to do it in the language that people understand.
Wow.
Don't stand there speaking English somewhere in Kisumu, they look at you and go back to their fish.
Okay. All right. I would like you to speak to the young people, women, you know, any values, pointers, points of emphasis that's upon your heart, generally. Yeah.
I think it's about training yourself. Don't wait for somebody to teach you. Look for the information and the knowledge yourself. Share what you have. But you have to be ready for those walls of resistance.
How do you deal with them?
You have to be ready to ram through, because it's not a walk in the park.
It's not a walk in the park.
We are in a struggle. Yes, and it's a psychological struggle and a political, and on all fronts. You have to be ready, you know, to have your shock absorbers on. So the young people, but also you need to learn from the older generation.
Absolutely.
Know what they went through. Because there's times younger people want to think that these old women should go and sit down. They should ask the Malaysians, whose 97-year-old prime minister is still running.
97
years. He's going for another term.
Back to parliament.
Yes.
I saw that.
Yes. You know, so you need to learn from the older generation. Like I told you, I myself cut my teeth in the solidarity movements, but also following the careers of those pioneer women. The Angie Brooks and the Jean-Martin Cissé
and
Madame,
training yourself.
The justice from Ghana. Yes.
Very, very important.
Because they made those landmark achievements. So he said, I also want to be like that.
Wow.
Always find a mentor you want to
tag along with and emulate.
Yes.
From a distance, close by, and you know, all those intergenerational conversations. Very, very critical. I think I have captured quite a lot from you in this short time. But maybe before we go, just on a a lighter note, if there is anything that you think about in these many years that you have lived and you're like, I think if I can do this before I leave this planet, what would that be for Fatoumata?
I'm not about to leave the planet.
Not yet. But
I stopped worrying about my age when I studied the Nobel women.
That's the right thing to do, actually.
Like, you know, when Wangari Maathai got the Nobel, I decided, well, they've only, at that time, there were 44 prizes for 43 women, because Marie Curie has two Nobels, although one recently got a second one. Now, when I was studying, I found that the average age of many of these women, especially in the sciences, they were in their 80s. Yes. There's one woman, actually an Italian woman, who got her Nobel. She was in her 80s. Now, she lived to be 104.
Imagine.
And she worked until she was 104.
Wow.
So I have not reached 100. I intend to live to be 105.
Great.
So
that is prophetic.
I'm not about to leave the planet.
That is prophetic, and we would like to see that come to life. And so you're working towards living that
104.
That is
or
powerful.
5.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. We've been here with Fatoumata Toure. She calls herself Jaja, speaking about Pan-African feminism and, of course, general issues of Pan-Africanism. I hope you've picked one or two things, more knowledge, information on issues of Pan-Africanist ideology. But I'm tempted to ask her one more thought before we go, because I think I have 2 minutes in terms of the future of the East African Federation. That seems to be coming quite faster than all the other blocks in West Africa. What is your thought on that before we go?
I was 10 years old when they were singing about the Shirikisho. Yes, there was a famous song, Twist. You don't know the Twist? There was a famous Twist tune in the 60s about the Federation.
Yeah?
But for so long as they don't do what I was saying, when the parliamentarians with the enabling legislation will still be twisting.
Still that dance, the twist.
What was being in the 1960s. Yes, there was a song, famous song, Shirikisho la Africa.
Wow. Wow.
But it's now up to the younger generation of politicians to do the right thing.
To do the right
Bite the
thing.
bullet and sign that enabling legislation and open the borders.
That's all.
That's it.
That's it. Okay. I think that can do for today. We'll see you another time here on Civic Space TV, particularly Women at the Front Line, where we journal women's leadership, women's impact in society here in Uganda and beyond. Shalom.